Thanks, Abraham. This is lucky too. Is there a type of expansion, I kind of know the answer to this, but I want clarity, that is more pleasing to Source than another type of expansion?
Well, expansion is expansion, and what's pleasing to Source is, you see, in the same way that when life has caused you to become this and you let yourself be it, that's when the pleasing part comes in.
Right.
So it is the becoming. It is the becoming that is the exhilarating thing. But you have to remember, everything that is becoming more of what it is. And so at the core of Source is love. So, of course, it is logical that the expansion of things that are loving in nature would not only be more pleasing to Source, but would be the only expansion or evolution that Source could experience. When you start at the core, which is the emotion, and then you go with the expansion, that's why someone who is in hate and expanding in hate, it's not that it's less pleasing to Source, it's that Source is not a vibrational match to it, and in fact the displeasure is in the moving away from that which is Source.
Right.
Did that make sense? In other words,
yes.
So the question is really interesting, because what is pleasing is becoming that which Source is.
So Source is able to differentiate the amazing feeling of different, can Source differentiate between the expansion of bacteria and the expansion of a human being? Because to me it would seem that Source would, although part of me understands it doesn't, be more pleasing in the expansion of who I am as a human being than the expansion of a single-celled organism.
But that is not the way that it is. Even though the expansion of the human being is more specific, expansion is still joyful in nature, and all expansion is, in other words, there is a lot of Source in bacteria.
It's hard to wrap my head around that, though.
Your physical body could not exist without it. It is good that there is bacteria as a part of this body that is you, or you would cease to be.
Sure.
All part of the balance.
So is there a way that Source differentiates between the expansion that a single-celled organism can offer in comparison to the expansion that, say, like an evolved other being can offer?
The reason the question is flawed is because that single-celled amoeba has a single-celled amoeba Source in vortex. And it is that single-celled amoeba Source that feels the exhilaration when the rest of the consciousness joins it and the expansion occurs.
And that's no different from me as a human being sending a rocket and joining that expansion. That's not any different to Source.
What you're really reaching for, and we are really appreciating and enjoying this unfolding, is that, of course, this is always true, and this is what you're reaching for. The more specific Source becomes, or anyone becomes, the more potential for joy. In other words, if you sort of want something and it happens, you sort of feel joy. If you really want it, and if somebody called you on the telephone and said, "Hello, you don't know me, I'm just calling to tell you I'll never call you again," you'd say, "Okay." In other words, the power of your desire, the degree to which you have asked and allow, there's a greater potential for joy there.
And
yes.
It's that kind of asking that a single cell, to me, seems like it can't do.
But you cannot disassociate. You cannot say that there is not a Source in the vortex calling that expansion forward and feeling exhilarated about it. In other words, Source, in the same way that man wants to say that God is omnipresent, we want to say that that which is God, or that which you call God, or that which is Source, is omnijoyful, omnijoyous, and always expanding.
And there's no degrees of that.
again, the more specific, the degree is not in the comparison of everything. The degree is in the comparison of the frequency of the subject that is active in the moment.
Right, okay. And that can come from
In other words, source does not need to wait for everyone on the planet to be in the vortex for source to be in the vortex. And source eagerly greets and meets everyone who joins them in the vortex, but there is no lack felt by source when you or anyone else is not there, you see.
So does thought play any part in the launching of the rocket? Thought?
Well, the rocket is a thought.
Hence, the things or beings or cells that are incapable of what we would consider as thought, how do they launch that rocket?
Because there is nothing that is incapable of thought. Because everything that is vibration or energy is thought.
Right.
And just because it's not a poignant or powerful enough thought for it to show up on your radar doesn't mean it isn't showing up on somebody's radar, and doesn't mean it isn't experiencing joy in the expansion. If there were not joy in the expansion of every thought, the early thoughts would have ceased to be, because it is always joy that calls everything forward.
Via thought.
Well, whether you're calling it energy or vibration or thought, here's a way to look at it. You think a thought, and as soon as you do, that thought thinks.
Right. So is there anything that can say, for instance, I were to get Alzheimer's or something, is there anything that can inflict on our body that can prevent thought or even emotion? Does that mean that rockets cease to be fired and that we can cease to expand? Say we're born with an incapacity in our apparatus, in our mind or brain to have a thought. Does that mean we sit in total allowing?
If there was not intentionality coming from non-physical, then the existence would not be. And if there is existence, then there was intentionality and the potential for joyous experience.
Yeah.
You have to step back a little bit sometimes when you ask questions like this and look at the bigger picture and understand that you are eternal, you see. It would be like saying in your physical experience, even on a cruise ship like this, does every single moment of every single day need to be as stimulating as the last 45 minutes have been? And the answer is no. There's plenty of room for lots of different ways of looking at things, you see.
Yeah. Okay.
So we know that we have left you somewhat unsatisfied. But you are, in a general way, feeling better than you were. In other words, we deconstructed enough thought and you reconnected with the essence of who you are. You are accepting that, well, let us ask you, do you accept that you are a vibrational being in a vibrational universe?
Absolutely.
And do you accept that your individual joy in this moment is not dependent upon your understanding or relationship with all of the other components that exist in this universe?
As much as I'd like it to be, I realise it isn't.
Would you accept that comprehension even of all that exists would be mind-boggling and overwhelming and all-consuming?
True, but I feel that in part of my understanding comes the feeling of me coming into alignment.
Yes, because in every particle of the universe it's exactly the same way. And when you
That's why I want to understand
when you understand that you were source energy, when you understand that you have a non-physical component that is vibrating and eternal, and you understand that this part of you that's focused here and now is emanating rockets of desire, and you begin to understand and manage the relationship between the physical you and the non-physical you, then you understand every particle of the universe, and now everything universally begins to make sense to you.
True.
And in the moment that you disengage from trying to compare what that one knows and that one knows and that one knows and that one knows and that one knows to what you know, and instead you let your life and your individual expansion be what calls you, then you are as intelligent as the one-celled amoeba.
Yeah.
And when we turn that around, the one-celled amoeba is as joyful as you. because it's relative. Everything is relative. In other words, your joy factor is about the relationship between who you've become and who you're letting yourself be right now. And all other creation is irrelevant because you don't have any way to vibrate for others. But when you come into this conscious knowing and you come into alignment with who you are and you radiate this knowing through the joy that you exude, others can get caught into in the wave of it, and the potential for them living a more cognitive, deliberate, joyful life than is there for them too. You see.
And it seems at that point there becomes less and less the need. One feels less and less the need to do or say things, because they're sitting in a place of knowing and being where you're almost double questioning every act and question, because you're being in a lovely
think about
place.
what you're saying. What you're saying is, I can get really specifically out of the vortex. And we say, yes, but when you're really specifically in the vortex, it's better and better and better and better. In other words, no conversation's better than negative conversation, but glorious, tuned in, tapped in, turned on, in sync with the wit and intelligence of the universe. There is no conversation more exhilarating than that, you see. So we agree with you. If you're negative, be quiet. If you're feeling good, rant on.
Yeah. Thank you.